Hey folks, tonight we're diving headfirst into the grim, unfiltered reality of life in Tudor Britain, a world of plague pits, chamber pots, and wardrobe choices that might actually kill you. Before we get started, hit that like button, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing this strange little community pop up across time zones. Alright? Dim the lights, let the fan hum in the background, and settle in. Your eyes flicker open. Congratulations, you've survived the night, which already puts you ahead of most Tudor peasants. But don't celebrate just yet. Your lungs are still smoky from last night's fire, your throat tastes like damp wool, and you're lying on what passes for a mattress, a sagging sack of straw that hasn't been changed since Henry VIII had functioning knees. It smells like mildew, goat, and quiet resignation. Somewhere in the room, a cat watches you. It might be yours. It might not. It doesn't matter, it lives here now. A pale, watery light seeps through your oiled parchment window just in time for your roommate to empty the chamber pot. Right out the window. Into the street. With a cheerful shout of warning, the contents arc through the morning air like the world's foulest comet before splattering on the cobblestones below. You sit up. Big mistake. Your back pops like a musket, your knees crackle like kindling, and the cold hits you like a betrayal. The fire in the hearth is little more than a suggestion, and the chimney is mostly decorative. The smoke has moved in, unpacked, and claimed squatters' rights. If you're poor, and let's be real, you're sharing this room with several other people who snore like oxen and sweat like it's their full-time job. There's no privacy, no silence, just the sound of your cousin coughing in the corner and the steady scratching of rats holding their morning meeting under the floorboards. There's no mirror, but if there were, you'd see your hair flattened with grease, your teeth looking slightly more diagonal than yesterday, and your eyes glowing with that unique Tudor mix of exhaustion and vitamin deficiency. Time to start the day. Just try not to step in anything soft on the way to the door. Let's talk about dental hygiene, or, more accurately, its absence. Brushing your teeth wasn't a daily ritual. It wasn't even a ritual. It was a rumor. No toothpaste. No toothbrush. No idea what bacteria was. If you were lucky, you might rub your teeth with a rag dipped in salt or soot. Nothing says fresh breath like bleeding gums and fireplace residue. Others chewed mint leaves, cloves, or twigs. Yes, twigs. Splinter delivery systems. You might think the wealthy had it better, and they did not. In fact, their sugar-rich diets often made their teeth worse. Nothing says, "I'm rich," like gnashing your rotting molars on imported candied figs. If a toothache hit, the kind that makes modern people sprint to the dentist, your only option was the barber surgeon. Yes, the guy who cuts hair, bleeds you, and occasionally saws off legs. He'd yank out the tooth with pliers sterilized in last week's rainwater. No anesthesia. No warning. Just a strong grip, a wrist flick, and a scream that echoes through family history. Breakfast time. Good news, you get something warm. Bad news, it tastes like beige sadness. Your drink? Ale. Yes, at breakfast. Because water is full of bacteria, frogs, and probably ghosts. Children drank ale. Pregnant women drank ale. Monks brewed it while muttering prayers and judging you silently. The solid portion of breakfast is bread. Coarse, brown, and somewhere between food and construction material. If you're a peasant, it's barley or rye, which Tudor doctors swore caused gas and melancholy, which you now have, along with a mild chewing injury. Butter is rare. Eggs are a gamble. Bacon? Only if you own a pig, and even then it's mostly fat with a hint of meat. If you're rich, congratulations, your breakfast is still beige, but slightly fancier. You get manchet bread, the artisan sourdough flex of its time, a brick of cheese, and a boiled egg that died twice. For sweetness, you get honey, complete with bee legs if you're lucky. Fruit? Not a chance. Welcome to Tudor Britain. Eat your beige. Drink your ale. Try not to die before supper. Fruit was seasonal, suspicious, and almost always baked into oblivion to keep it from upsetting anyone's humors. People lived in constant fear of unbalanced inner moistures, so everything was boiled, stewed, or roasted into submission. And you'd better eat quickly, because a full day of work is waiting. Whether you're hauling buckets, weaving wool, or pretending to understand the Book of Common Prayer, your fuel is bread. Always bread. No pancakes. No smoothies. No avocado toast. Just bread, ale, and that special sensation of having a drier mouth after eating than you did before. Breakfast in Tudor Britain wasn't the most important meal of the day. It was just a bleak little reminder that you were alive, and possibly slightly tipsy. The motto of Tudor fashion might as well have been, if it isn't stiff, itchy, or flammable, you're not wearing it right. Getting dressed was not a quick affair. It was a process, a ritual, requiring layers, patience, and a willingness to feel like a trussed-up roast for the next 12 hours. If you're a man, congratulations, your day begins with pulling on hose so tight they threaten your circulation and your dignity. Over that goes the doublet, a heavily padded vest with buttons clearly invented by a sadist, squeezing your torso into the shape of a decorative wine bottle. Finish the look with a starched ruff around your neck, a wearable pie crust, and you're ready to waddle nobly through your day. Women, of course, had it worse. Start with the shift, then the kirtle, then the fardingale, a hoop skirt that gives you the turning radius of a dinner table. Next comes the bodice, so tight it can shift your organs into a new arrangement, followed by the ruff, starched until you physically cannot look down without headbutting your own clothing. Top it all with a hat or headdress that makes you look like either a Gothic cupcake or someone preparing to summon pigeons. Comfort was irrelevant, status was everything. The harder it was to breathe, sit, or digest, the richer you appeared. Washing these clothes? Rare. Spot cleaning? Aggressive. Perfume? Poured on liberally to disguise the smell of human existence. If you reeked of lavender and despair, you were doing it right. Buttons were mostly decorative, laces were everywhere, zippers didn't exist, and elastic was a future dream. Dressing often required a helper, or at least a stiff drink. Shoes were no better, wooden soles, hard leather, no cushioning. By midday, your feet felt like they had been personally cursed by the Pope. Fashion wasn't about expressing yourself. It was about surviving the day without passing out, toppling over, or accidentally setting your sleeves on fire, all while looking respectable. Let's step outside. Take a deep breath, and immediately regret it. The street isn't paved. It isn't even level. In winter, it's mud. In summer, dust. Year-round, it's a fragrant cocktail of animal dung, human waste, rotting food, and the occasional dead thing no one wants to deal with. Sanitation was more of a dream than a reality. Chamber pots weren't emptied into sewers, they were hurled out the nearest window. If you were lucky, someone shouted, "Gardezello." Watch out for the water, before dumping last night's horrors onto the street below. If not, congratulations, you've just experienced the Elizabethan version of a surprise water balloon fight. The streets got so bad that shoes had to evolve. Enter the patterns, wooden platforms you strap to your actual shoes to keep from sinking into the muck like a sad biscuit in tea. Walking became a skill somewhere between tightrope acrobatics and urban park hour, dodging puddles, piles, and things best left unidentified. And then there were the animals. Pigs wandered freely. Geese strutted around like they owned the place. Horses contributed generously to the mess at every opportunity. No one cleaned up after them, unless by accident, so the street became a stew of hoof prints, filth, and bad decisions. And heaven help you if it rained. Then the road turned into a slow-moving river of liquid misery, flowing downhill toward the nearest ditch like some kind of grotesque civic fountain. One wrong step and you're ankle-deep in Tudor regret. There's no way to daintily tiptoe around the mess either. The streets are crowded, loud, and aggressively enthusiastic about shoving carts directly into your shins. If you trip and fall, you lose your dignity, your coin purse, and any lingering desire for breakfast. And then there's the smell. Imagine a compost heap in a heatwave having a midlife crisis. That's your daily air. People carried pomanders, little metal balls stuffed with herbs, just to survive the scent of their own neighborhood. If you're used to garbage trucks, plumbing, or the miracle of Febreze, Tudor Britain would treat your senses like a chew toy. So you've landed in Tudor England and you're wondering, how do I move up in the world? Answer, you don't. You stay exactly where you are, like a decorative tapestry nailed to a damp castle wall. Society was neatly layered, like a wedding cake made of stone and passive aggression. At the very top, the monarch, a person who could literally order your beheading because your hat annoyed them. Below that, nobles. Then gentry. Then merchants. And way down at the bottom, you. A commoner. Maybe a peasant. Maybe a serf. Maybe just person who cleans chamber pots but still gets taxed. Being born into the lower class wasn't just inconvenient, it was a life sentence. You couldn't marry up unless you were obscenely lucky or unusually attractive by 16th century standards, meaning pale, soft, and ideally looking like you'd just survived your third bout of tuberculosis. Education? For the rich. Land? For the richer. Rights? Don't make me laugh. Everything about you, your food, your clothing, even the length of your sleeves, screamed your status. Literally. Sumptuary laws made sure of it. These were actual laws dictating what colors and fabrics you were allowed to wear based on your rank. Thinking about purple? Forget it. Purple was for royalty, bishops, and people who owned more than one fork. And ambition? Dangerous. Speak too eloquently, and suddenly you're a witch or a traitor. Both came with the charming punishment of being executed in public while someone sold meat pies nearby. Your job was simple: know your place, work until you collapse, and die quietly. If you were unlucky enough to catch the eye of someone powerful, congratulations, you now get to be exploited in a more official capacity. Even religion wasn't a way out. The church told you that God wanted you to be poor. Your suffering was noble. Your empty stomach was a blessing. Your ever-expanding brood of children was a sign of divine favor. Comforting, isn't it? If you dream of a cozy Tudor job with regular hours, health benefits, and a dental plan, allow us to introduce you to reality, a day full of blisters and tetanus. Work in Tudor England wasn't about self-fulfillment or climbing the corporate ladder. It was about surviving long enough to work again tomorrow. From dawn to dusk, and sometimes beyond, your body was the main tool of production. If it broke, you were replaced. Usually by your child. Let's say you're a farmer. Congratulations, you wake before sunrise, choke down a crust of bread pretending to be food, then spend the next 12 hours wading through mud, sweat, and livestock byproducts. Your plow is wood, your hands are calluses with fingers attached, and your one ox is probably limping. Calling in sick isn't an option, mostly because sick is your default state. Maybe you're a tradesman. Fancy. Instead of freezing in a field, you freeze in a workshop, inhaling sawdust or lead fumes by candlelight. Blacksmith? Your job is basically medieval CrossFit. except no one follows you on Instagram. Cooper, you make barrels until your spine resembles a decorative question mark. Or maybe you're a servant in a noble house. That means 24/7 on-call duty, sleeping in hallways, and waking to the sound of someone yelling because you didn't light the fire fast enough. Payment comes in leftovers, cold ones, if you're lucky. Children work too. As soon as they were old enough to stop eating nails, they were put to work as chimney sweeps, stable boys, water carriers, cheap, expendable, and very flammable. And women? They got to do everything else. Raise children, enough to field a Tudor soccer team, with substitutes, spin wool, churn butter, haul water, cook over open flames, and still get blamed if the bread burned or the cow gave them side-eye. Vacations? Not a thing. Days off? Rare. Your rest day was Sunday, and that just meant standing through a 3-hour sermon about how sinful you were. Weekends weren't a thing. Rest was just what happened when your body finally gave out and no one noticed for a few hours. Feeling a little sick in Tudor Britain? Sore throat, fever, suspicious boil that seems to be whispering Latin? Great. Time to call the doctor, but be warned, what's about to happen next is less medicine, more medieval improved with knives. Doctors existed, but mostly for the rich. And even then, their approach to health was based not on science, but on humors, not the funny kind, but the ancient belief that your body was ruled by 4 mystical fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If you were sick, clearly your bile-to-phlegm ratio was off, and the solution was simple: bleed you until you forgot why you were sick in the first place. You'd be pricked, sliced, or drained with cheerful enthusiasm until you were pale enough to see through. Many barbers doubled as surgeons. Yes, the same man shaving your face might also amputate your leg, often with the same razor, sterilized only by being wiped on his apron. If you were poor, and let's be honest, you were, your healthcare came from the local wise woman, your cousin who knew a few herbs, or a man selling potions out of a dented cart with a slogan like "guaranteed to work." Treatments ranged from garlic stuffed into wounds, to warm animal dung on the chest for asthma, to drinking mercury, because someone swore it scared away evil spirits. Dentistry? That was just waiting and praying your tooth fell out on its own before some guy with pliers and no qualifications decided to help. Anesthesia didn't exist. Pain relief was ale or liquor, which also served as disinfectant, sedative, and the surgeon's courage. And when the plague rolled into town, which it did, frequently, doctors wore beaked masks stuffed with herbs to filter the bad air. This was considered cutting-edge medicine. Meanwhile, actual cutting edges were being used to lance your buboes. No gloves. No clue. You didn't choose religion in Tudor England. Religion chose you, usually by royal decree, with all the subtlety of a cannonball through a stained glass window. This was not a peaceful age of spiritual reflection. It was a time when kings and queens played theological musical chairs, and everyone else had to pray whichever way the throne was facing that week, or risk losing their head. Henry VIII set the tone by breaking up with the Pope in history's most violent divorce. Overnight, England went from Catholic to Church of England, meaning you now owed allegiance and taxes directly to Henry. Refuse to switch sides? Enjoy your free heresy trial and one-way trip to the executioner. Then came Mary I, Henry's daughter, who was very Catholic. As in, burned 280 Protestants alive just to prove a point Catholic. If your family owned an English Bible, you either buried it in the garden or prayed your neighbors weren't in a snitching mood. In this world, you could be executed for praying the wrong way, owning the wrong version of Scripture, looking too smug during Mass. Faith wasn't just personal, it was a full-contact sport, and the penalty for losing was usually fatal. Enter Elizabeth I, the Queen who swung England back toward Protestantism, but with a dash of pragmatism. Her attitude was simple: don't be too Catholic, don't be too Protestant, and above all, don't cause trouble. This worked, mostly. Unless, of course, you were a Jesuit, Irish, or just standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Religion under Elizabeth was like walking a tightrope over a shark tank while wearing bells. Church attendance wasn't optional. Miss a Sunday, and you'd get fined. Priests acted as both spiritual guides and royal informants. Sermons were frequently thinly veiled political speeches. Nobody was entirely sure if God approved of you, but you knew the Queen had to. Confess the wrong belief, and you might end up in the Tower. Say nothing, and someone might accuse you anyway, especially if they wanted your land. Faith wasn't something you found. It was something you performed, carefully, while checking over your shoulder, muttering prayers through clenched teeth and hoping this month's theology wouldn't get you boiled alive. Just when you thought things couldn't get worse, surprise! It's plague season again. Like pumpkin spice lattes in modern times, the plague came back every year or two, except with more screaming and less cinnamon. The Black Death and its charming cousins returned regularly, turning towns into open-air morgues. Symptoms? First a fever, then pounding headaches, then oozing buboes, painful, grotesque swellings in places you didn't want to talk about. People turned black and blue as their organs gave up one by one. Death arrived within days, unless you were unlucky enough to linger. Hygiene wasn't helping. Chamber pots were dumped into the streets, rats ran the show, and fleas were the kingdom's most reliable healthcare workers, just not in a good way. Your best shot at survival was to flee the city fast enough or to be naturally antisocial enough to avoid contact with literally everyone. Government response? Quarantine, Tudor style, nailing your front door shut and painting a big red cross on it while your neighbors prayed loudly that you wouldn't sneeze near their livestock. If you died inside, eventually someone would come collect your body. Doctors, if you could afford them, wore those infamous bird masks stuffed with herbs to filter the bad air. The masks didn't work, but they did make them look like evil bird lawyers, which was arguably scarier than the plague. The economy collapsed every time the plague visited. Markets shut down, trade died, and labor shortages meant your local blacksmith might double as your midwife. Entire towns vanished, rumors of divine punishment spread, and somebody always blamed women, foreigners, or, tragically, cats. If you survived? Congratulations! You were either naturally immune or just outrageously lucky. Don't celebrate too hard, though another wave was always coming, and it usually brought friends. So you survived the plague, the chamber pots, and a heresy accusation. Time to relax, right? Well, not exactly. Tudor leisure time was equal parts public humiliation, animal cruelty, and mildly drunk chaos. Start with public executions. These were the Tudor version of Netflix. People brought snacks, kids, and gossip. The best seats were right by the scaffold, assuming you didn't mind a little blood on your bread. Hangings were for common criminals. Nobles got beheaded, ideally in one clean slice, though if the executioner was bad at his job, you got a few extra swings for the price of one. The crowd cheered, booed, and rated the performance like it was a sporting event. If that wasn't exciting enough, there was bear baiting, chaining a live bear to a post and letting dogs attack it until one of them lost. Sometimes the dogs were mutilated ahead of time just to keep things spicy. Audiences loved it. Feeling fancy? Head to the theatre. Shakespeare was the hot ticket of the day, offering tragedies full of murder, ghosts, and the occasional cross-dressing gag. The audience, however, was anything but polite. If you didn't like the play, you threw a turnip at the actors. Interactive theatre, Tudor style. For simpler pleasures, you could watch chicken fights, bet on dice games, before the church banned them as sinful distractions, or throw rotten vegetables at your neighbor in the stocks. Fun for the whole family. Against all odds, you survive another day, only to lock eyes with someone across the muddy square. Your heart races. Your palms sweat. Is this love? No. This is Tudor Britain. Romance was less soulmates and more strategic land acquisition. Marriage was a business deal first, second, and third. Love, if it showed up at all, arrived late, confused, and slightly drunk. Families arranged matches like livestock trades, dowries were exchanged, inheritances secured, and no one cared how the bride felt about it. If you were nobility, marriage was a political chess move. You could be a teenager marrying a man old enough to remember the Crusades, but if he had land and you had a womb, it was considered a perfect match. Peasants had slightly more freedom. You might marry because your cows grazed in the same field. Romantic courtship usually meant supervised negotiations disguised as affection. A man might write you a love poem, but only after confirming your father owned 2 pigs and a decent patch of barley. Sex before marriage was forbidden, which meant most people did it anyway. If caught, you were hauled before the church court and fined. Women, meanwhile, entered a lifetime of childbirth roulette and domestic labor. Men got financial stress and, yes, more childbirth roulette. Adultery was common, discretion was rare, and divorce was nearly impossible, unless you were a king with a taste for beheadings. Otherwise, you were in it until death or plague did you part. Yes, Queen Elizabeth supposedly bathed once a month. Good for her. You, the average Tudor peasant, would be lucky to rinse your feet in a muddy stream between ploughing fields and dying of trench mouth. Water was suspicious. Clean drinking water was rare in towns, so most people drank ale, even at breakfast. Children drank weak beer. Babies? Beer-flavored porridge. Meanwhile, washing with water was considered dangerous because it was thought to open your pores and let disease waltz in. The result? A proud cultural tradition of no wash, no plague. Shockingly, this did not work. Instead of bathing, people fought stench with perfumes, herbs, and pomanders, tiny scented balls worn around the neck. The result was like a wet dog negotiating a peace treaty with lavender inside your nostrils. Hair care wasn't much better. Lice combs were as common as spoons, and delousing was practically a romantic date night activity. Wigs were powdered with everything from starch to crushed bone, meaning even the fashionably clean smelled faintly of funeral parlor. Teeth? A Tudor smile was rustic at best. People scrubbed with soot, salt, or crushed oyster shells, methods that sound like home improvement projects, not dental care. Queen Elizabeth's teeth famously turned black from sugar, but since she was a trendsetter, people started blackening their own teeth on purpose. Yes, rotting teeth were a fashion statement. Clothing hygiene followed a similar logic. Linen undergarments were changed only when they turned transparent with grime. Outer garments were brushed, beaten, or simply ignored because washing risked shrinking them. A shrunken doublet was a social catastrophe. Let's say you committed a crime, stole bread, insulted someone's hat, or worse, had thoughts. Congratulations! You've just enrolled in Tudor Justice 101, where trials are short, rights are optional, and the verdict is usually ouch. Forget lawyers. Trials could be over before you finished saying, "Wait, that's not mine." Your defense might be a quick prayer or just hoping the judge was too drunk to care. Spoiler, he wasn't. Punishments were designed to be memorable. Petty crime? Stocks. You'd be locked in place while townsfolk threw vegetables, or, if they were feeling Tudor about it, dead rats. More serious crimes meant public whippings, hot iron branding, or losing your ears, a kind of medieval loyalty card. Collect both ears and your next punishment was free. Adultery? Public shaming. Slander? Lose your tongue. Repeat offenses? Hangings, quick if you were lucky, botched if you weren't. And for capital crimes like treason, witchcraft, or saying something weird during Lent, the punishment escalated to hanging, drawing, and quartering, where they killed you 4 times for the price of 1 and then turned your body parts into a cautionary art installation. Nobles got beheaded, which was considered classy, unless the executioner had shaky hands, in which case you got the deluxe multi-swing package. And Berlin at least got a French swordsman. That was considered the VIP treatment. If you were very lucky, you might be pardoned and shipped to the colonies, which was like escaping a fire by jumping into a cold, raccoon-infested well. Justice in Tudor England wasn't about fairness. It was about fear, theatre, and making sure everyone watching went home thinking, yeah, I'm definitely not stealing that chicken. Sleep. That magical time when you recharge, dream, and briefly forget you live in Tudor England. Except you don't, because sleeping was hazardous too. Forget mattresses. Most people slept on straw sacks that smelled of mildew, goat, and generational disappointment. The wealthy got wooden bed frames with ropes holding up the mattress, hence sleep tight, which originally meant tightening the ropes so you wouldn't wake up bent like a question mark. Privacy? Forget it. Families, servants, and even the occasional neighbor's dog all slept in the same room. The concept of personal space simply hadn't been invented. And you didn't even sleep all at once. Many Tudors practiced first sleep and second sleep, waking up around 1 a.m. to pray, chop wood, or quietly argue with their spouse. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, staring at the darkness, and deciding it's butter churning time. Windows were sealed tight because night air was believed to cause disease, which turned the room into a humid stew of sweat, farts, and paranoia. Fire was also a constant risk. Houses were wooden, roofs were thatched, and candles were open flames just waiting to turn your home into a bonfire. Falling asleep with one lit was the 16th century version of Russian roulette. So yes, good night, and maybe good luck. And then there were the bugs, lice, fleas, bed bugs, the true landlords of every Tudor mattress. If you weren't scratching, you were probably already dead. As if the itching weren't enough, there was the constant background hum of supernatural paranoia. Ghosts, witches, demons, all taken deadly seriously. Sleepwalking? Proof you were possessed. A bad dream? Clearly a curse. The cure was usually a mix of prayers, bloodletting, and, if all else failed, a brisk slap from the local priest. We begin with the most miserable, awkward, and socially radioactive job in medieval history, the town torturer. The one person who had job security, a steady salary, and absolutely no dinner party invitations. So before you settle in, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's descend, quietly, into tonight's story. You weren't born swinging chains and tightening screws. Like every other medieval child, you were born in a cramped cottage that smelled like wet straw and onions. You were small, quiet, and a little too fascinated by frogs. Nobody thought much of it, until you started asking strange questions. While the other kids played knights with wooden swords, you were behind the bakery, dissecting dead mice and asking your parents how joints worked. Not in a prodigy sort of way. More in a "this child makes the priest nervous" sort of way. By 10, you already knew how to sharpen a knife. Not to hunt, just because it made you feel organized. You weren't violent. You were curious. Which, in a medieval village, was the most dangerous thing you could be. Your father was probably a butcher or a cooper, your mother the sort of woman who sold herbs and made the neighbors whisper. You weren't cursed, you were just available. And then one day, a magistrate or steward looked at you, quiet and observant, and asked the medieval equivalent of a job offer. He's not squeamish, is he? Soon after, you found yourself apprenticed. Not to a knight, not to a blacksmith, but to a man with an apron that smelled like vinegar and iron. He didn't explain much, just pointed at benches and buckets and expected you to understand. You swept floors, scrubbed stains, learned not to ask questions. Rule number 1. You didn't sleep lightly because you were scared, only because your room was next to the stairs that led below. The wood creaked. The doors echoed. Sometimes you thought you heard whispers that weren't yours. And that's how it began. Not with a flash of evil, but with a quiet child, a practical town, and a job nobody else wanted. Your mentor, Gregor, Uncle Gregor if you asked too many questions, lived just far enough from the village that people didn't have to pass his door on the way to church. His house had no garden, a locked shed, and far too many ropes. He wasn't cruel, just practical. He taught you how to boil water, mix cleaning solutions, and oil gears. He grunted if you guessed what they were for, louder if you guessed correctly. Your first month was spent scrubbing benches, arranging chains by size, learning which cranks would take your fingers if you weren't careful. It was mechanical, quiet, efficient. Gregor sat by the fire each night with a tin cup and stared into the flames. Sometimes he'd hand you a book, not the Bible, something older, smelling of ash and bone, and you'd read until you were too tired to think. When you finally graduated, there was no ceremony. No scroll, no handshake. Gregor just dropped a key into your palm and said, "Basement. You know the way." And so you descended the stone steps, torch in hand. The air got colder, not refreshing cold, but the kind that settles into your bones and stays there. The room wasn't big, but it made up for it in mood. Low ceilings. Rope-lined walls. The infamous bucket in the corner. That was your welcome. From then on, you lived on the edge of the village, in a stone rectangle generously called a house. Your nearest neighbors were indifferent crows. The walls were thick, which helped with the sounds, mostly. The smell was another matter. It was as if someone had once tried to clean the place and given up halfway through. You learned quickly that torturers didn't get mystery. No hood, no mask, no ceremonial robe. You had a face, and everyone remembered it. People crossed the street when you walked by. Mothers ushered children indoors. Shopkeepers gave you stale bread and prayed you'd leave. The gloves became your signature. You wore them all the time, not for style but because you never knew when you'd be asked to tighten something, or someone. The boots were worse. They made a sound that was final, a dull thud on the cobblestones that mothers learned to recognize before they even saw you. You weren't hated, hatred would have meant passion. You were regarded the way people regard tax season, necessary, unpleasant, and better dealt with quickly. Your workroom was as much a character as you were, stone walls, iron hooks, a table so heavy it might have grown out of the floor, tools hung neatly like a very cursed kitchen. Gregor drilled neatness into you. A messy workspace, he said, was an unprofessional one. And this was a profession. Make no mistake. You learned what he called pain math, the angles, pressures, and tolerances of the human body. Enough to produce truth, not enough to explain to the bishop. You became precise. Measured. People thought you were a brute, but you were closer to a chef. Timing, pressure, rhythm. Even agony had a rhythm. The town treated you like a broom kept in a locked closet. Forgotten until needed, then quickly put away again. Your pay was irregular, sometimes silver, sometimes turnips, once a chicken that looked as though it already knew what you did for a living. You never expected thanks. Your reward was a locked door, continued employment, and bread that was only slightly stale. And yet you stayed. Because what else could you do? Your reputation followed you like smoke. You were no longer a person. You were the man in the basement. Gregor eventually left, walking into the mist one day, gloves in hand, never seen again. You took his place, trained an apprentice of your own, and kept the tools oiled. No one ever carved your name on a plaque. Children dared each other to knock on your door. Adults averted their eyes. Officials whispered your name like a prayer of administrative relief. When you are gone, no one will speak of you. No one will hang a tapestry or write a ballad. But the door will still be there. The room will still remember. And the silence that follows will be the closest thing to a legacy you'll ever have. Long before anyone called it the Silk Road, there were only faint trails, dusty arteries winding through scorching deserts and snow-crusted mountains. Herders, nomads, and early traders carved these paths, never imagining they would one day become the most legendary trade network in history. Its true rise began during the Han Dynasty, around the 2nd century BCE, when China pushed westward in search of alliances against the Xiongnu nomads. What they discovered instead was opportunity, a world of strong horses, shimmering glass, pungent spices, and an insatiable demand for silk. But the Silk Road was never a single road, nor was it smooth or safe. Its eastern end began in Chang'an, modern Lebanon, one of the ancient world's largest and most cosmopolitan cities. From there, traders loaded camel caravans with rolls of silk, bundles of tea, lacquerware, and porcelain. Their journeys led not to one destination but through a web of relay points, markets, and oasis cities stretching all the way to the Mediterranean. Crossing these routes meant facing the Taklamakan Desert, known ominously as the place of no return, the endless steppes of Central Asia, and the rugged mountain passes of Persia. Goods passed from hand to hand, just as stories, languages, and religious ideas did. The Silk Road was less a road than a living bloodstream of culture, pulsing across continents. But don't romanticize it too quickly. The journey was brutal. The Gobi Desert's blazing sun cracked lips and blistered skin. Sandstorms could bury entire caravans. Wells ran dry. Bandits stalked the dunes. And yet merchants pressed forward, not just for wealth but for survival. For those who succeeded, the rewards were dazzling. For those who failed, the desert became their grave. Silk was worth its weight in gold. Roman nobles demanded it. Persian kings adorned themselves with it. And so the Silk Road became more than a marketplace. It became a bridge between worlds, a chain of empires linked by camel hooves and caravan bells, driven by human ambition and the unshakable urge to see what lay beyond the horizon. Imagine waking before dawn. The desert air is still cold, your face dusted with grit. Your most precious companions are not your fellow merchants but your camels, grumbling, chewing, stubborn creatures that carried civilization on their backs. A typical caravan might include dozens or even hundreds of camels, each carrying up to 500 pounds of goods, bolts of silk, sacks of spices, ivory tusks, blocks of jade. Merchants timed their travels to avoid the worst heat, navigating by the stars and following routes marked by bleached bones, grim reminders of those who strayed. By day, they trudged across burning dunes and rocky passes. By night, they huddled around fires, sharing flatbread, stories, and news of distant cities, while mercenary guards, often Turkic or Sogdian fighters, kept watch for raiders. Camels were outfitted with bells and colorful cloth, both for protection against spirits and as a show of wealth. And when caravans finally reached a caravanserai, a fortified roadside inn spaced roughly a day's journey apart, they found safety, warm food, and a chance to sleep behind thick walls. These stations were cultural crossroads where Arabic met Sanskrit, Chinese met Greek, and deals were struck in a dozen tongues. The Silk Road carried far more than silk. From China flowed porcelain, tea, lacquer, paper, and even compasses and crossbows that changed navigation and warfare forever. From west to east came glassware, silver, wool textiles, coral, wine, soap, and brilliant dyes. Goods often changed hands dozens of times, each sale increasing their price, so that by the time a bolt of silk reached Rome, its cost had multiplied tenfold. But perhaps the most valuable cargo was not material at all. Ideas traveled as surely as spices and silk. Buddhist monks carried sutras eastward from India, founding monasteries in places like Bamiyan and Dunhuang. These sites became storehouses of wisdom, with painted caves and libraries filled with sacred scrolls. Islam, too, traveled east, bringing Arabic script, scholarship, and a worldview built around trade and law. Cities like Samarkand became intellectual melting pots where Persian poets, Arab scientists, and Indian mathematicians shared discoveries under candlelight. No single faith dominated the route. Zoroastrian fire temples, Christian churches, and even Manichaean texts found refuge along the trail. Languages blended, and translators, called dragomans, became essential guides through this multilingual world. A proverb born in Persia could end up as a fireside tale in Mongolia. A Greek philosophical idea might inspire a scholar in China. The road was also deadly. Bandits operated in organized gangs, striking quickly and vanishing into the desert. Wealthy caravans hired escorts or paid protection money to nomadic tribes. Nature was no kinder. Sandstorms swallowed paths. Mountain passes claimed animals and men with avalanches. Water thieves were executed without ceremony. Disease moved invisibly with the caravans, carried by fleas, rats, and travelers themselves. Smallpox, measles, and eventually the Black Death all rode the Silk Road, sometimes wiping out entire oasis towns. Though history books often praise emperors and generals, women were vital to the road's heartbeat. In cities like Samarkand and Torfan, they ran inns, tea houses, and market stalls, places where news and secrets were traded as eagerly as spices. In noble families, women acted as diplomats and deal-makers, marrying across clans to secure peace and trade routes. Some princesses traveled with entire caravans as dowries, bringing goods, wealth, and alliances across thousands of miles. Nomadic women were traders, property managers, and negotiators. They wove the textiles that became coveted exports and composed songs that echoed from oasis to oasis. But the Silk Road also carried enslaved women, captured in raids or sold in markets, their labor and suffering hidden in the shadows of history. By the 16th century, the Silk Road's pulse slowed. Maritime trade routes opened, allowing ships to carry cargo faster and cheaper. Why risk deserts and bandits when a ship could take silk straight from port to port? Fragmented empires, rising tariffs, and regional wars further strangled land trade. The once vibrant road grew quiet, not with sudden collapse, but with a slow unraveling. Yet it never fully died. Many caravan towns became local markets, pilgrimage routes, or later, railway stops. Even now, its spirit lingers in the highways of Central Asia and in the cultural connections it forged. The Silk Road changed the world. It spread Buddhism to China, Islam to Central Asia, and paper and gunpowder to the West. It brought peaches to Persia, horses to China, and the concept of zero across continents. Most of all, it proved that humanity has always been willing to cross deserts, climb mountains, and risk everything to connect, to trade, to learn. The camel bells may have fallen silent, But every border we cross, every idea we share, is an echo of that great road, a whisper of the caravans that once tied the world together, one hoofprint at a time.